Adelaide, the capital of South Australia, is known for its festivals, beaches and vibrant community. But beneath the surface, the city's southern suburbs have become the stage for an altogether darker environment. It is a battleground for a growing drug trade that quietly traps thousands of innocent souls and leaves only destruction behind. In recent years, drug use and addiction have surged across Australia, with Adelaide ranking among the city's hardest hit. Methamphetamine and other substances fuel a lucrative but blood-tinged shadow economy filled with violence, intimidation and fear. This is where Robert Atkins found himself. He was many things, but will always be remembered as a son, a brother and a friend. At 29, Robert was like many young men in Adelaide, still searching for his place in the world. Sometimes his life was a struggle, but his world was filled with love from those around him. His mother remembers him as caring and quick to smile, someone who, despite his challenges, always tried to do right by those he loved. And still, the promise of a quick buck and a way to fuel his growing addiction presented itself, and Robert got dragged into the city's low-level drug scene. Trust in that world is often a costly mistake, and debts are paid in violence. In November 2020, Robert disappeared. For weeks, his family searched desperately for answers, clinging to hope as police pieced together a story of captivity, violence and betrayal. How does a young man just vanish? And how do the police even start to piece together the real story? This is the tale of Robert Atkins, a sombre tale that reveals the cutthroat nature of Australia's drug trade. Robert Atkins grew up in Adelaide's southern suburbs, an area marked by both tight-knit communities and the creeping shadow of the ever-growing drug trade. He was 29 years old at the time of his disappearance and will be remembered for his warmth and loyalty. Those close to Robert recall a young man who, despite facing personal struggles, was deeply loved by his family and wanted to find his place in life, searching and trying to carve out his own niche. As the pressures of adulthood began to take hold, Robert found himself increasingly involved in circles where trust was scarce and danger was never far away. The southern suburbs of Adelaide have been battling a growing methamphetamine problem for a long time. The absence of any resources for addicts has a devastating ripple effect on families and neighbourhoods across Australia, but not least here in southern Adelaide. Here, low-level drug dealing is a matter of survival for some. People like Robert start dealing to make ends meet, but in reality, it becomes just another web of debts and exploitative relationships, a life packed with risk. The city's drug scene is known for how volatile it can be. Seemingly small disputes over money or territory can quickly descend into violence, and the threat of retribution hangs over people involved like a black cloud. You never know how big the target on your back has become. That's the position Robert found himself in. The later investigation revealed that he was working at the bottom of the dangerous ladder of the drug trade. He was vulnerable, ripe to be exploited, and would always be a suspect if anything went wrong. At that level, there was no trust. In late 2020, everything started to close in around him. Police believe that several individuals, described as meth-dealing bullies, were at the centre of a violent criminal network that used intimidation, threats and violence to control others within the drug scene. In the lead-up to his disappearance, Robert is thought to have fallen afoul of these figures, probably because he owed them money. The warning signs were there in plain sight. Robert's mother noticed changes in his behaviour, missed calls, anxious conversations, and a growing sense of fear around him when he did speak to his loved ones. Slowly, he withdrew further and further from family life. Sure enough, in November 2020, Robert went missing. Behind the scenes, threats and debts had been mounting. For Robert, he no longer knew who his friends were and who was his enemy. Robert Atkins was last seen alive on November 15th, 2020. CCTV footage caught images of him with another man in North Adelaide, visiting a store and purchasing items before leaving with the other man. That was the very last confirmed sighting of Robert. After that, nothing. Complete radio silence. What isn't clear from those CCTV images is that he had already been held captive for around a week by this point. held by captors in the south of the city who made him commit a series of crimes with a loose promise that he would earn his freedom if he complied. Days went by and Robert's mother started to worry. There had been no telephone or bank account activities in November, something that rang instant alarm bells. Robert was not a man who went without contact. Desperate for answers, she started reaching out to friends, acquaintances, and anyone who might have seen Robert. Sadly, it turned up nothing, but his mother also knew the lifestyle he was living and seemed hesitant to report his missing status to the police. Eventually, in January 2021, she decided enough was enough and reported him missing. By that time, he had been missing for around 2 months. At first, the police found it difficult to make any headway. The nature of the local drug scene means witnesses are often hard to come by. Nobody wants to appear as a snitch, for fear of consequences, knowing Robert's fate would likely happen to them if they passed on information. Detectives from Task Force Southern were eventually able to start piecing together his movements, focusing on the days he was held captive between November 8th and November 16th, 2020. They tracked vehicles they believed had been used by the suspects, followed up on leads concerning houses where Robert may have been held, and appealed again to the public for information. Still, there was a complete lack of any physical evidence, and nobody, absolutely nobody, seemed keen to talk about the disappearance of this man. The police were getting nowhere fast. For Robert's family, the wait, seemingly endless, was agonizing. Each day without news seemed to reduce the likelihood they would see him alive again. Still, they refused to give up hope. Whilst the news they eventually got wouldn't be positive, their persistence in trying to find the truth did lead to breakthroughs and at least an answer as to what happened to Robert. As the investigation progressed, police slowly uncovered a disturbing and unsettling chain of events. Robert had been taken and held prisoner in a house on Mander Road, Christie Downs, where he was violently assaulted and forced to commit crimes under duress. Then he was moved to another property on Halyard Crescent, Seaford, before being transported further north to rural areas near Buborowie and Port Pirie, where police believe he was ultimately murdered and his body disposed of. Forensics was key to unearthing the truth. Searches at both the Christie Downs and Seaford properties were carried out, with investigators trying to identify traces linking clear suspects to the unlawful detention and assault, and to trace Robert's movements to try and establish how things came to an end. Together with the limited witness statements and CCTV footage, slowly but surely, a timeline of events leading to Robert's death began to form itself. Two of the biggest pieces of evidence involved in the case were 2 vehicles tied to everything that happened to Atkins during his ordeal. A black 2010 Jeep Cherokee and a silver 2008 Nissan Pathfinder. These 2 vehicles were identified as being used to ferry Robert between locations. Not only that, police believed that these vehicles were involved in the disposal of his body after he was eventually murdered. Surveillance footage showed the Jeep Cherokee near Williston, returning from the Port Pirie area to Adelaide, which created leads. Police were able to appeal to the public for any information about the drivers or sightings of these vehicles, opening up an avenue to get information from people who weren't involved in the drug trade, and therefore more likely to come forward. Robert's disappearance made waves in the local community. Rumours and fear started to brew in Adelaide's southern suburbs as more and more information came to light. Families and neighbours were shocked to learn about the level of cruelty involved in the case. Together, the forensic evidence, vehicle tracking and tip-offs from locals helped police finally build a real picture of the crime. In early November 2020, Robert Atkins was forcibly taken and held captive by a group of low-level drug dealers and petty criminals in Adelaide's southern suburbs. For about a week, from November 8th to November 16th, he endured repeated assaults and was coerced into committing crimes for his captors, believing that obedience might secure his release. From the last CCTV sighting on November 15th, it seems that Robert was already in the city's northern suburbs, buying items with a man, perhaps one of his captors, before leaving. It became clear that he was moved completely out of the city after that. First taken north to Buborowie, then to the Port Pirie region using that 2010 black Jeep Cherokee. The vehicle was later captured by a safety camera returning back to Adelaide. the final moments of Robert Atkins are believed to have unfolded on November 16th, 2020. Police allege that at daybreak, in the rural area somewhere between Port Pirie and Buborowie, Robert Atkins was murdered. The exact details of his final moments remain a mystery, but evidence collected suggests he was killed and his body was disposed of near Orroroo, a remote location north of Adelaide, a location chosen to minimise the chances of his remains being uncovered. The perpetrators clearly had a plan. They wanted to make Robert's death look like suicide. This tactic isn't uncommon in drug-related murders, particularly in Adelaide. This made it tricky for the police, and not for the first time. Similar cases, such as the death of Trevor King, were also treated as suicides at first before being reclassified as homicides after a deeper investigation. The cover-up in Atkins's case included the disposal of evidence. Police later recovered more than 100 bullets and ammunition packaging from the Hutt River near Clare, believed to have been discarded by associates of the suspects in an attempt to destroy links to the crime. For months, Robert's final fate had remained a mystery. It was only after persistent investigation by Task Force Southern, formed specifically to address a series of suspected murders in Adelaide's southern suburbs, that a real breakthrough finally took place. Police searches eventually led to the discovery of human remains in a water tank in the Port Pirie area, believed to be those of Robert Atkins. Forensic analysis and corroborating evidence from the movement of the Jeep Cherokee helped confirm the link between the remains and Robert's disappearance. The investigation revealed that Robert's murder was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of violent crimes within Adelaide's methamphetamine scene. Police have since arrested several individuals in connection with Robert's unlawful detention, assault and murder, including both men and women linked to the same criminal circles suspected in the deaths of Trevor King and Jeff Mundy. The motive? That isn't totally clear, but the three murders are consistent with disputes over debts, perceived betrayals, and the use of violence and intimidation to enforce control over lower-level dealers. Police have clarified that these murders were not the work of organised bikie gangs, but instead carried out by groups of loosely affiliated, low-level dealers and enforcers who bully, threaten and stand over others within the community. Finally, for the Atkins family and Robert's friends, they had their answer. Robert was dead and had died at the hands of ruthless and violent thugs. However, justice hadn't been delivered, not even close. Task Force Southern has continued to pursue leads, carry out further forensic testing, and appeal for more information from the public in order to try and bring those who committed this heinous crime to justice. Investigators have examined the properties linked to Robert's captivity and murder, processed those key vehicles for evidence, and followed up on every single credible tip. Public appeals remain ongoing, with authorities urging anyone with knowledge of the crime to come forward and help break the silence that often surrounds drug-related violence. The positive news is that so far, 5 people have been arrested and ordered to stand trial in connection with the alleged assault and murder of Robert. This group includes a 33-year-old man charged with arranging the unlawful detention of Robert, 2 other men aged 32 and 43, and a 25-year-old woman charged with unlawful detention and causing harm. Their arrests are part of the ongoing investigation by Task Force Southern into Robert's death. However, at the time of making this video, there had been no confirmed jail sentences for anyone connected to the crime. For Robert's family, the search for justice continues. His mother, who first reported him missing, has worked tirelessly to try and uncover the absolute truth, enduring months of uncertainty and heartbreak. Even now, the full extent of Robert's ordeal isn't known. It's safe to say that his mother won't rest until every person involved in the detention and murder of her son is made to pay the price for the crime they committed. What the family does know is that Robert ultimately suffered at the hands of people he once knew and perhaps trusted with his life. The quest for answers has become a mission and a way of life. It is no longer about simply honouring the memory of a loved one, but also an effort to prevent similar tragedies from happening over and over again in a city where drug-related violence is becoming more and more common with each passing year. News of Robert Atkins' murder and the connected cases of Trevor King and Jeff Mundy really began to shine a light on the trouble lurking beneath the surface of Adelaide. many people still saw as simply a bright, vibrant and culturally rich Australian city. As news of these murders and the reasons behind them began to come to light, people began to see the dangerous and dark underground, filled with drugs, crime and violence, that was rotting the place from within. One positive is that residents in the local community have become more vigilant, and there is a growing movement in favour of stronger action against those who bully, threaten and stand over others. Robert Atkins won't be forgotten, and hopefully in time, true justice can be served for this son, brother and friend from Adelaide. For now, this brings us to the end of the case. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. If you've enjoyed this video and want more stories from the Australian underworld, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps me out and helps the channel grow. Till next time, take care.